The following is a Spirit Street production.
Man, Big 12 Media Days is over, and boy, was there a lot going on there. Turns out things are starting to heat up on the ACC. You know, here on Big 12 Insiders, we had mentioned a June 30th date. We thought things were going to kick off, and maybe things were going to implode with the ACC. Well, turns out we were wrong. It was the next week after that. Things are starting to fall in line as far as that is concerned. We got a lot of that we're going to talk about today, here and more. So let's get after it. This is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
All right, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. This is Big B, Brien Hanley, along with Tim Fitzgerald. We are back from Media Days in Vegas, back in the studio, so I'm feeling good about it. Although I'm going to be gone next weekend, though. Fitz will be out of town. But having said that, you know, I'm feeling good. My first Media Days, it was a really good time. Really good time. So met a lot of people, contacts, understand a little bit more about how all that stuff works. Had a good time. So I appreciate you for the invite.
Yeah, it worked out great. I mean, they forgot to get us a table initially. We caught it at the last second. So they put us on the very end, which ended up being fantastic. We were way too far away from the podium, but because we're on the very end, we also didn't have a lot of traffic around us, a lot of noise around us, and we could kind of get things done. We had like coach interview tables right to our right that ran the opposite end of the field, to the side of the field. And as I told the Kansas people, the Missouri people, that we were basically located with a bird's eye view of Patrick Mahomes' game-winning touchdown pass in the Super Bowl. That was the very corner of the end zone we were by.
Yeah, it was a good time, man. So let's get into this, Fitz. So we talked about ad nauseum, it seems like, about the ACC possible implosion, or not necessarily blowing up per se and going away like the Pac-12, because I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think there's going to be some changes within the ACC. And now we've got word that Clemson and Florida State got passed over. The Big Ten is saying, nope, we're not taking them. The word on the street is also that the SEC is like, no, we don't want them. Never did want them is what the SEC is saying. Never did want them. And so now it's like Big 12 is like, you know what? This makes sense. Come over here. I know that you've had some thoughts on it, Fitz, on how you thought all of that could make sense, and going to both of those schools, including even in North Carolina, which we'll get into in the second half of this, and talking to them about saying, hey, look, you can be the big dog over here. I get it. I think the money is still going to be distributed evenly, but as far as them coming over, it seems like it's a real deal, and there's going to be others. It's not just going to be them. There's going to be others. So first off, what are your thoughts on all of this shaking out, Fitz?
Well, first thought is the ACC is dysfunctional, maybe more so than the Pac-12. The Pac-12 was kind of a family, but they just were a family not making enough money, so people took other jobs. That's basically what happened. The ACC is having some serious infighting about how the money is being allocated, and it's growing to a point where it's become inevitable almost that Florida State and Clemson leave. Big B, I don't see a way they turn around at this point.
They're not.
I'm sure it's there. Maybe they get into private equity and make this all work. But now we're hearing that neither one of the other Power 4 conferences want them.
Right.
Which, kind of makes sense. You stop and think about Clemson and Florida State. They don't necessarily fit the academic profile of the Big Ten, or at least what they want now. Mm-hmm. And as far as the SEC goes, that's South Carolina and Florida. I mean, you already have schools there. You want to expand your footprint. And this gets back to, that's why I think North Carolina and Virginia, you can set aside what they're doing on the field. These are enormous schools with enormous fan bases and impressive academics. Those are the two schools the two conferences want the most.
Right.
They just do. I mean, for the Southeast Conference, it's new states. And for the Big Ten, it's new states that fit the academic profile. So what do you do now, Florida State and Clemson? You've basically burned down your bridge to go back. Feels like it. So you're pretty much left with the Big 12, which I'm granted, I understand that would be like a, this is best we can do. I get that, but I think they fit this conference. I think it's the best fit for them. And I've had a daily delivery on this. Now, I was leaving Las Vegas, Big B. You know me. I was cautious about this. And
right.
I didn't like the sourcing on it. And Ross Dellinger even backed off his comment on John Kurtz's show about being more speculation. But now with Jason Shear, my colleague from the Arizona 24/7 site, reporting on this, that dude nailed everything in the Pac-12 and took ferocious heat from people for what he was saying when he was right. And he's in on this now. I'll be following his reporting this week, but something's cooking, and he's all over Florida State, Clemson, and Louisville being included in the Big 12 plans. But what I come to is 4. I'm hearing 6. 6 doesn't make sense. 4 does, unless too many good schools to pass up.
Right.
I don't know. It gets very interesting. I just can't imagine 24 school conferences, anything over 20. I can't imagine 20, but here we are.
Hey, well, here's the thing, though, is, 5 years ago, could we even imagine where we are right now? So while we say we don't think 24, I think 24 is a legit possibility. I really do. Just for the simple fact, like I said, 5 years ago, we had no clue we would be right where we are right now. But here we are. And so going to 24, solidifying yourself, and we'll dig into that right now as far as how the conference plans to do this. Because first of all, there's a lot of talk out there about, well, let me clarify this real quick before anything. As you guys know, I am from Louisville. That was the school. I grew up as a diehard Louisville fan. I still am. And through back channels and people that I know there, this Louisville thing going to the Big 12 with Clemson and Florida State is 100% real. So it's not made up. It's not rumor. It's when Louisville before, when all this stuff started going down, they were nervous because they didn't know where they were going to be. When they didn't initially get accepted by the Big 12, Louisville's like, what do we have to do to get into one of these big time conferences? Now there is zero panic for the people at the University of Louisville. They are like, well, if nothing happens, we're in the ACC, we're okay. But if Florida State and Clemson both go, we are going along with them to the Big 12. So that part I know. So you can take that speculation out of it. They're going to be going. They're not going to just take 3, though. It's going to be at least 4, and I'm thinking 6. And I know a lot of people don't think that North Carolina was a viable choice. I believe North Carolina is actually a viable choice. How do we get to this, Fitz? Private equity. We had this conversation in Vegas. People think of private equity as only being bad. Well, I'm sorry, people. Private equity didn't make their money by just taking companies and then just selling them off for parts. That's not how that. Now, I know that's a part of what they do, but that's not how they make their money. They invest in something and they want it to work. They want it to grow. They want it to make money. So for people to only think that the Big 12 is, oh man, they're going to get into private equity pretty soon. It's going to get taken over and then sold off for parts. I don't believe that that's what PE firm is looking to do with the Big 12. And that is how they're going to get over this, because they're going to be at least doubling the amount of money that teams are going to be getting, not only currently in the Big 12, but also the I'll say 6, because I believe 6 are coming from the ACC. They're going to double the amount of money that they're going to get. Is it as much as the SEC and the Big 10? No, but it's a hell of a lot more than what they were getting before, Fitz, and it makes sense.
It does. It does. And the private equity investment will help the Big 12 entice those schools because they will all have buyouts.
That's right.
And I mean, I don't see the SEC or Big 10 probably offering to pay their buyouts, which is something that maybe the Big 12 is doing, or at least in part doing, which is huge for the finances of those 2 athletic departments, or 3 athletic departments in this case. Now it becomes a question, who else would they want? And I'm intrigued by that, because the Big 12, believe it or not, has some standards.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really want schools that don't fit their kind of, honestly, their land grant profile. There's just not much of that going on with the conference. And now they kind of have also a urban feel to it with, Orlando and Cincinnati and Houston coming in. But when you stop and look at this, Clemson, Florida State absolutely fit the profile of this conference. Louisville fits that more urban profile. But also then you got Virginia Tech, North Carolina State. Where does Miami fit in? Do you really turn down Miami? I mean, that's a brand. It's not a blue blood. That's a brand.
Yeah.
They don't seem to fit what this conference is about. But, man, if you can have 3 schools in the state of Florida and 4 in the state of Texas, your coaches that need to do some recruiting are going to love you.
Yes.
Because those are probably the 2 best hotbeds of high school football recruiting right there.
Yeah, well, in my opinion, look, Florida State and Clemson come to the Big 12. Louisville and Miami would be the next 2 teams. So then it's just a matter of who else. The rumor mill is going crazy because, and now this is what it is really on the rumor, is the Big 10 taking Texas A&M. I think there's a lot of meat on that bone because while you would say, oh, you're crazy. No, I would never leave the SEC. First of all, the money is going to be the same by going to the Big 10. That's number one. And number 2, Texas A&M hates the fact that Texas got into the SEC. They hate it. So if they had an opportunity to leave and go to the Big 10, I'm not saying going back to the Big 12, but if they could go to the Big 10, they'd do it. And they fit their bill as being an AAU school. So they would absolutely do it. So that's something that has some legs to it, and then maybe it's a North Carolina or Virginia go there because I don't think the Big 10 would just take 1 team. That doesn't make sense. So they're at least going to take 2. So we'll see how all that plays out. But we'll take a quick break here. We'll come back on the other side of this, and we'll dig into this a little bit more, Fitz, because like I said, there's a lot of meat on this bone, and it's not just the rumor mill. So one word from our partners here at Synergy Financial. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Again, this is Brien Hanley with Tim Fitzgerald. So, Fitz, let's talk about maybe the downside of what can happen. We're talking a lot. We've talked the first part of this about, the upside and all the positives. First off, are there negatives? Let's start there. And if there are, what are some of the negatives of adding these teams to the conference?
Well, the initial 4, I see no negative. I mean, you're at 16 already, which is probably too big. So why not go to 20? You're going to have to do scheduling pods, Big 12. I'm sorry. I know you don't like that word, but you're going to have to at some point. Try to keep some sense of regional. I mean, you don't bring in a bunch of ACC schools and then only let them play each other twice every 4 years. It doesn't make sense. So, I'm just really curious. What's the number? Where is too much? Is Brett Yormark thinking about essentially running 3 conferences of 8, 2 conferences of 12, 4 conferences of 6? How are they looking at managing this while maintaining some kind of sense of regional play among the members? But I know this, if one cat's smart enough to figure it out, it's him with his ADs. They'll sort this out. But it also comes back to this, Big B. What are the networks willing to pay? Mm-hmm. And I think the only way, and this is harsh, the only way this works for ESPN is if you destroy the ACC. And they can break that contract and shift that money over and then buy whatever's left of the ACC on the cheap. Because they have the advantage, unlike the Pac-12, of having a lot of schools around them that could slide in. Does it diminish the ACC? Yes. But South Florida is a good fit. You look at East Carolina, they could slide in. The Coastal Carolina is growing like crazy. There's schools all up and down that eastern seaboard that could fill the gaps for the ACC and still be a somewhat functional, although at a lower level conference. So it's all going to come down to the money. How does the money add up? Is ESPN and Fox willing to invest in the Big 12 plus 4, 6, 8 ACC teams? We'll find out.
Well, first of all, I think they would be.
Yeah, I would too.
But again, they have to be the right schools. The one thing that I can say is you get Florida State and Clemson, that covers it for football. I'm not saying that's the only schools, but when you're talking about football, ESPN and Fox are going to be bought in. If you bring them and 2 other schools, 4 other schools, they're going to be bought into that. Then you talk about basketball. Well, the one thing to keep in mind, and again, I know this is going to sound like a Louisville homer, but it's the 100% fact. Before Louisville stunk the last 2 years, for the last 6 seasons in a row, they were number 1 as far as television basketball, the market for watching college basketball. Now, a lot of that has to do with where it's located because Kentucky is right there, and I understand that, but basketball is still basketball. There's a lot of people watching basketball there. ESPN will be bought in for that. They just absolutely will. So when you put all of that stuff together, I think the Fox and ESPNs of the world are going to be bought in. If there's another avenue, which again, I think we kind of covered, looked like Brett Yormark, we're out on a basketball deal for the Big 12 conference. I mean, he kind of put the kibosh on that at Big 12 media days just by saying we're locked into 2030. Yeah. When you're saying something, when you're saying literally we're locked in, that doesn't sound like any other deal is right around the corner for that.
It sounds like
that's a smoke screen, but I'm guessing it's not.
It sounds like
he doesn't seem like the smoke screen type fit.
No. You went to the TV partners and they went, no, yeah, we're staying pat right now. We're not going to find a way to give you more money. We're trying to make money too. So, yeah, that's probably on the back burner for, look, it's 2024. It's not that far off.
Nope.
I hope I'm around in 6 years. I'd love that. I'd love to see this happen. It's really not that far. And in terms of how much the climate has changed over the last 6 years in college athletics. So I think it's still a very viable idea. And it's something that might come into play because does football eventually break off into its own thing, free of the conferences? That's a whole nother topic. But I think he knows there's a lot of things that are going to move around between now and then.
Yeah. And that's the main thing. There's going to be a lot of movement. This thing, it seems like it's every 1 or 2 years something happens. So basically about every 18 months. But I really think that this Florida State and Clemson thing, like I said, there's too much smoke. Sometimes, there's smoke, there's fire. Yeah. It seems like the whole the sky is filled with smoke at this point. There's not just a little smoke out there. The sky has turned to smoke. And now it's just a matter of, okay, what neighborhood is on fire? Because this thing I just think it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Does it happen before football season? Here's my thing, Fitz. I think it's in their best interest if it does, if it happens before football season. For the simple fact, football is football. You don't want that stuff getting in the way. It can be distraction to fans, coaches, players. You don't want that. Just get it done before all this happens. And then we move on from there, understanding what the guideline is. We'll take one final break here. And after we hit this break, Fitz, let's talk about a timeline on when all of this actually transpires and gets kicked into motion. One word from our financial sponsor, or from our sponsor, Synergy Financial Partners, and we will be right back.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's return to Studio 73.
All right, we're back with Big 12 Insiders. So, Fitz, like I said, we've talked a little bit about what's going on with the ACC, with Florida State, Clemson, Louisville. I also believe Miami. I believe North Carolina. Then it's a matter of, okay, who's next? Who's that last team? Is it Duke? You've heard that thrown out there. Is it Virginia Tech? Is it Virginia? I kind of think Virginia goes to the Big Ten when all this goes down. So I don't think Virginia is really a viable. But Duke, that's a name that's being thrown around out there. Before we go to the timeline, Duke's a name that previously nobody talked about Duke being anything because, again, we talk about just this in terms of only football. Well, you got to think about Duke's brand in basketball. It's bigger than a lot of these schools that we're talking about football-wise. It just is. And to ignore that would be silly. It would be silly. And not to mention, you bring North Carolina and Duke with Louisville over to the Big 12. I mean, it would rival, if you count the SEC as the greatest football conference ever, or the Big 10, whatever, it would rival those in terms of the best conference ever. I mean, because it would clearly be the best basketball conference ever assembled. But I don't know if Duke is that viable, but here in the last couple of days, you've heard Duke being a name thrown out there, Fitz.
Yeah, you have. It's interesting. I just don't see Duke having interest in the Big 12. It almost feels like the Cal Stanford thing. We're just too good for you guys. Thanks for the offer. That kind of nonsense. But maybe with their back up against the wall, they'll end up saying, okay. I also have a sense that Duke might, I really believe there's a place in college athletics for a Division 1A, a FBS level of an Ivy League. And I think if you created that, you would make friends in the SEC and Big Ten that could move Northwestern and Vanderbilt into that. But that's a whole nother thing to talk about. Duke's basketball. Duke is probably only one of 2 or 3 schools in the country, Kansas being another one, that could get into a major conference because the basketball is so good.
Correct.
I mean, Kansas's football's coming along, but that only helps a little bit because the basketball's so good, people want them. Duke's on that level. North Carolina's probably on that level. North Carolina has a lot of other things going for it. But if there's a bigger play, I don't think Duke gets included at 4 and maybe not 6. But if there's 8, yeah, I can see that being a move and a really good move for the conference. One of the things in college realignment that drives me crazy, Big B, is people want to turn it into the soccer model with, promotion and regulation, whatever it is. Look, moving teams up and down. Well, maybe that works within a conference. If you're at 24 schools, maybe you have different divisions within your conference for football, basketball. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff you can do. You can get creative with this, make it really more compelling to watch, add some storylines, but this is huge. The ACC is just coming apart. It is an unhappy family. They can't change the rules. They can't bring in more money. No. They're not going to take money out of one member's pocket to give it to another. Nobody's going to want that except for the schools that are getting the money.
Correct.
And short of, I'll be blunt here again, short of kicking out Wake and Syracuse and Boston College and anyone else they feel like is really dragging the financials of that conference down, short of kicking them out, which I don't see happening. I think this is the only thing that will make some schools happy is, okay, we got to go somewhere else. There's a better deal waiting with a conference that, just like the Pac-12, we should be better than, but they have managed this whole thing so much better than we have.
Right. So let's just say, the nuclear button gets pushed. What are we talking about the timeline? When does all of this take place? I mean, clearly it can't happen this year. I don't even think it can happen next year logistically. But 2026, is that when all of this goes down? Is somebody going to have to? I mean, here's the thing, though. If if Florida State and Clemson get out of the ACC, then immediately ESPN is going to cancel that contract. So do the schools still have to pay to get out? That would be the thing. Yeah. Is like, are they going to have to pay? Which I don't think that's going to happen. Then that's why I think Clemson and Florida State were in cahoots on the lawsuits that they filed, because they're separate lawsuits. Right. Florida State's, they're suing to get out. They just, hey, we want out of here. Get us out of here. Clemson, on the other hand, said, hey, we just need to see the financials. Let's see what's going on with the money aspect and how this whole grant of rights things actually works. They were in cahoots. A lot of people didn't think that they were. we had been saying from the beginning that we knew that they were just filed separate lawsuits. Very, very smart. You get lawyers in a room, I'm telling you, they'll come up with some stuff, even if you don't like them. They're smart enough to come up with the right things to do for who they're being hired to do them for, and they did it in this case. But what are we talking about with the timeline here?
It's funny how our perceptions of how quickly schools can move have altered. I mean, because essentially there was one athletic season, Pac-12's done, in come the 4 schools.
Yeah.
Oklahoma and Texas, though, did wait 2 years. There was 2 years between the notice of them leaving and, 2 football seasons were played. And I think that's more realistic, particularly if it happens in August, that they say, okay, well, obviously it's not happening this year or probably next year because those schedules are set and da-da-da-da-da. Or it could be 3 years because isn't it 2027 is ESPN's renegotiation with the ACC can be opened back up? Maybe that makes sense that, they have their revolt at that point and says, okay, we're going. And ESPN says, okay, we're done paying. We're not going to re-up this contract. There's so many things here that these lawsuits are trying to accomplish. And one of them is getting the finances, not just of the ACC, but of that contract they have with ESPN brought into daylight. And ESPN does not want that. They don't want anyone seeing anyone else's contract. No business does.
Right.
And that's not because they're evil. It's just because it's how you conduct business. You want to keep everything. This is your deal. This is your deal. You don't want them to know that, well, you didn't do a very good job negotiating, but they did. And that's really what's going on. They do not want anyone to see this. And they're fighting tooth and nail. But if it happens, I can see as ESPN going, okay, this is dysfunctional. We want out of this too.
Yeah. I mean, my thinking is ESPN says, oh, if these schools are out, we're done immediately. And I got to believe there's something in that contract, especially again, with lawyers get involved. There's going to be something in that contract that says, hey, I know they've got something in there, the number of teams, but I'm sure there'll be something in there that if Clemson and Florida State get out, that ESPN will be able to get out right away. And then that'll just be the end of it.
Wasn't like 15 schools was the limit. And that's why they brought in Cal, Stanford, and SMU.
Because they knew that something like this was going to happen. Exactly. And the whole thing about it is, like we've talked about, it's not going to implode. I don't think the ACC is going to just be gone. It'll still be a conference. There'll be still something there. It's just not going to look the same. And again, I don't think anybody wishes that, Fitz. I don't think anybody wish the Pac-12 was gone. I don't think anybody wishes that the ACC goes away or changes to the extent that it's going to change. But this is just where we are, man. It's unfortunate, but this is just where we are.
Well, the reason the Pac-12 isn't around right now in any form is Cal and Stanford.
Correct.
They simply said, we're just much too good for the rest of this neighborhood. We're going to have to go over here to the East Coast to hang out with those elites.
Yep.
Those conferences those 2 schools are toxic for a conference. They just are. Their academic elitism just doesn't fit the athletic profile in the current model. And they're going to keep, I think their presence going to the ACC accelerated some of this. FSU and Clemson are like, what the hell? They didn't want it. It was another thing forced upon them. And North Carolina State was a swing vote. And some schools might remember that when it comes time to leave the conference and who they want to go with. That gets very interesting. But I wish Cal Stanford would just say, okay, Oregon State and Washington State, let's bring in schools from out here and have an athletic conference.
Yes.
Because that's what it is, Cal and Stanford. It's not an academic conference. Nobody's going to get more stupid for playing at Boise State. You might go colorblind, but you're not going to get dumbed down by playing at Boise State. They're not beneath you. They're not. Get off your high horse and have a regional conference out there that's called the PAC whatever and the ACC whatever on the East Coast. Even if they're not quite Power 3, there might be a second level there that keeps them kind of in touch with things.
Yeah.
The academic arrogance is the biggest thing that's just shattering conferences right now. And I think it's going to happen at other places on down the road. Greed keeps going forward.
The thing about it is to keep in mind is because some people are going to take your words that you're bashing the schools. Fitz isn't bashing the schools. All he's talking about is This is the academic side getting in the way of the athletic side. It's fine to work in tandem, but when you get in the way, that's where the problems come in. And at Cal and Stanford, it got in the way, and now here we are. This is where you are. Well, okay, that's fine if that's the way you want to do things. Nobody's telling you that you can't do the things that you want to do. But there are consequences, and we've seen the consequences. And I wouldn't be surprised, Fitz, if, again, ACC goes the way that it's going to go, that Cal and Stanford aren't out of there after a year doing something different. I would not be surprised at all if that happens. Just wouldn't be surprised at all if that happens. So
here's my final piece of advice to those schools. If having academic ties to institutions is so important, which I understand there's a whole level here of academics and research that we don't appreciate how important it is. It's much more, research is much more important than athletics in many ways.
Yes, it is.
So I get that it's really important. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying if it's so damn important, why don't you form your own conference of research institutions? Why don't you get together with Duke and Tulane or whomever else might fit the profile you're after and say, hey, let's form a conference of research. That's a pretty cool idea, actually, because they're basically being lazy, just leeching onto an athletic conference and trying to make it the research conference. And the market isn't paying, TV isn't paying for academic research, scientific research. They're paying for sports.
Right.
That's what the money's about. So why don't you just divorce those two things, schools, and get busy winning in athletics and surviving and finding your own path, a new path in academics.
And maybe might be the wake-up call that some of these schools need, seeing exactly what happened and saying, okay, enough's enough. We got to figure this thing out. And it's not that these schools don't, heck, what does Stanford have, like 30 total sports or something crazy like that? So it's not that they aren't taking sports serious. It's just they're not taking as serious as what everybody else is taking it. And that's the difference. You got to match that intensity if you want to be at that level. Whether you have the resources or not, schools are at least trying to match that intensity in one shape, form, or another. Well, Stanford used to be that. Cal used to be that. They both were, they were once proud programs, especially in football, and now they just kind of hit the wayside. But we'll see. Maybe they can bounce back. Maybe this will turn around for all of them. Bottom line is, I think the ACC goes. I think it goes before and when I say goes, Clemson and Florida State get out and the conference changes as we know it. And I think it happens before football officially starts. I think the ball gets rolling on this thing and we hear something in the next couple of weeks. We could be wrong. And if we're wrong, we're wrong. It is what it is. But I think something is going to happen sooner than later. And I think that's best for everybody involved, Fitz.
It feels like it's accelerating right now. It really does. It feels like it's really moving forward and getting some steam coming out of Las Vegas. And if everything else follows what we've seen in the past, it's going down here pretty soon.
Absolutely. So thanks everybody for tuning in again. Remember, Tuesday through Thursday, these are the summertime hours. We got some good things cooking for the fall, for football season. We've got some good things cooking. So remember to like, follow, subscribe, continue to leave all those comments. I love going back and forth with you guys. Even if we don't agree, I like that too. So tell us exactly what you think. We appreciate it. We will be back tomorrow. Again, this is the Big 12 Insiders.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.